bayonets and horses trending very strongly. Let me just ask you, Harry, about American attitudes. We heard President Obama, who's already the president, saying, if I have the privilege to be your president for the next 4 years. But we heard Mitt Romney saying, if I'm going to be president, then corrects himself and says, when I'm going to be president. How do American voters, how is that going to be received by American voters?
My first observation is I don't think anyone will really pay any attention to that particular choice of words. He is the challenger. He is asking people to vote for him. It might have been presumptuous. If he had just said, when I'm president, it would sound presumptuous. If he just said, if I'm president, it might sound lack of confidence. So he said both. Whether intentionally or accidentally, it was probably a prudent way to proceed.
In terms of, there's been a general mantra from the Romney camp, we heard this in the Ryan-Biden debate as well, that the Obama foreign policy is unraveling. That's a word they use quite often. How would you rate the level of hyperbole of the rhetoric in these debates?
Well, I think Harry's right that we often see 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of Mitt Romney. I mean, even in that answer, we see a strident Romney, which Obama criticised a lot in this debate. He said, look, Mitt Romney doesn't want to negotiate or even talk to Iran. He wants to keep the troops in Afghanistan and maybe would have kept them in Iraq. But Romney in this debate moderates on many of those issues, said, no, 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 there's a deadline in Afghanistan of 2014. And this is one of the good things of this debate, these debates. It puts something on the record of him saying this. So I think that's a change to some extent from some of the early positions that Romney had. This notion of unravelling foreign policy under Obama, I think is quite a stretch, but it's clearly a sort of Republican talking point. It's clearly where they want the public to be on Obama's foreign policy, to say, look, the world is a difficult and sort of scary place at times, and Obama can't control anything. Now, no US president can control everything. Things are sometimes going to be out of control, and I think as a challenger, this is a fairly useful tactic because there are limitations to US power quite clearly.
Well, as we know, this was a debate about foreign policy, but very quickly it reverted back to national issues, to domestic issues, and in fact, Mitt Romney spoke very strongly. His one big word for the night, I think, has been jobs. So he had this to say about creating American jobs.
I've got a policy for the future and an agenda for the future. And when it comes to our economy here at home, I know what it takes to create 12 million new jobs and rising take-home pay. And what we've seen over the last 4 years is something I don't want to see over the next 4 years. The president said by now we'd be at 5.4% unemployment. We're 9 million jobs short of that. I will get America working again.
That is his big, strong point, isn't it? That hitting Obama with the last 4 years of declining numbers.
Very much. I mean, if the election was solely going to be fought on unemployment statistics, Obama would be a one-term president. So Romney became the issue, I think, for quite a bit of this campaign. It was really a referendum on whether Mitt Romney would make a good president. And for most of this year, people have said, no, Mitt Romney might be the best the Republicans could choose, but he's not the best person to run this country. After the first debate, there was a remarkable turnaround, and that probably was because the expectations of Romney were very low. He'd made a lot of gaffes, I think, during the year. It had been a weak field. He performed pretty well in that first debate, and Obama looked drained by the job in some regards. Things are clearly evened up now, but if Romney can hammer home this message about jobs, there'll be job numbers coming out at the end of October, so that will be very important. If the election is fought on jobs, Obama is really in trouble.
Another thing we've seen trending on social media is that they really liked it when the president got feisty, when he sort of went into more combative mode. But he also, Harry, tried to bring it back to domestic issues. He spoke particularly about energy policy, and he spoke about education reform quite strongly. This was always going to be about domestic issues, even though it's nominally about foreign policy, isn't it?
It had to be this year. This is simply not a year where foreign policy is on the front burner in the voters' minds. It's the economy. And we're seeing a strange switch. Normally, at least in recent elections, we've seen Republicans trying to run on foreign policy issues and Democrats hammering home the economy, equal opportunity, better jobs, better incomes. this election is the one thing that makes this election unusual to me is that we're hearing a Republican running on domestic policy and a president defending his record very much so on his commander-in-chief role and keeping the world a safe place to live in.
We've only got about a minute left, but you said we see different types of Mitt Romney appearing when he's a governor, when he's a candidate, when he's the nominee. What about President Obama? Some of the criticism has been that he's maybe too nice in these situations.
He got a bit feisty when Romney kept talking about the apology tour. This is something that got under his skin and actually set the debate alive at about the hour mark in the debate. And I think Obama really dislikes this notion that he went to the Middle East, particularly with his Egypt speech, and apologised to the nations of the Middle East. Sure, he admitted mistakes, and the interesting contrast was that Romney is never willing to admit American mistakes. It's a notion that America has always acted sort of valiantly and sort of honourably in its foreign policy, which is no nation can act like this. But I think if you're going to use that as the basis of an apology tour, then Romney will win the argument.
So, just to sum up, Harry, do we get anything definitive out of this debate, or did they just not make any major mistakes?
No one made any major mistakes. They were both cautious and careful and used this debate, really to sum up their positions overall. And I think in terms of this debate's impact, I don't think it will have an impact on what happens in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, you know, if we pick one state, it has to be Ohio that's going to decide this. It's 49-48 at the moment, though the biggest newspaper in Ohio has endorsed President Obama. Are you prepared to stick your neck out and say what's going to happen?
We'll be watching Ohio on Election Day. You did right about that. I think that Obama goes into this, I think by most rated at about 63% likelihood to be the next president. This is going to be a close election, though. In the coming weeks, minor events are going to take on massive proportion.
Thanks to you both, Harry Melkonian and Brendon O'Connor. Thanks for joining us. Well, that concludes our coverage of this debate. Our thanks to our two guests. Please join us in 2 weeks' time. That's on Wednesday, the 7th of November, Australian time, for our special coverage of the election itself. And we will, of course, have a full wrap-up of today's events tonight on World News Australia at 6:30. I will see you then.
Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets.
And what we've seen over the last 4 years is something I don't want to see over the next 4 years.